when a billionaire's disabled son asked a black waitress to dance in the middle of New York's most exclusive restaurant, the entire room froze. Forks stopped midair, whispers died, and every pair of eyes turned toward the boy in metal leg braces. Trembling but determined, no one dared to move except her. That simple moment, a child's innocent request and a woman's quiet courage, would shatter one man's pride, rewrite his beliefs about power, and start a chain of events that changed countless lives forever. Because what happened next wasn't just a dance. It was a revolution, one that began with a single step. The silence inside Kingsley's, Manhattan's most elite restaurant, felt like it could crush you. Crystal glasses shimmered, a pianist played softly in the corner, and among the wealthy diners sat Richard Montgomery, one of the richest men in the country. Across from him was his 10-year-old son Lucas, his legs strapped in metal braces that squeaked whenever he moved. For most of the evening, Lucas had stayed quiet, hiding behind the linen napkin in his lap. But when the pianist began a gentle waltz, something in him changed. He turned to the waitress serving their table, a young black woman named Diana Johnson, and whispered the last thing anyone expected to hear. "Would you dance with me?" The words hit the table like thunder. Forks clinked, conversation stopped, and a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Sir, control your son," barked the manager. "This isn't a dance hall. Our staff are not here to entertain guests." Richard's face tightened. He hadn't taken his son out in public since the accident that paralyzed his legs. 2 years earlier, he couldn't stand the stares, the pity. "Lucas," he said firmly, "sit down." But Diana didn't move. She looked from the boy's trembling hand to the furious manager, then calmly untied her apron. "I can't dance in uniform," she said softly. And just like that, she took Lucas's hand. The room gasped. The boy's first step dragged painfully against the marble floor, the metal braces screeching, but Diana didn't correct him or rush him. She simply followed his pace. 3 uneven steps. That's all it was. But in those few seconds, Lucas wasn't a disabled child or a burden to be pitied. He was a leader. Across the room, Richard felt something twist inside him. A flash of memory of his late wife, Elizabeth, dancing with Lucas in their living room, whispering, "It's not about perfection. It's about connection." The moment ended as quietly as it began. Diana helped Lucas back to his seat and said, "Thank you for the dance, sir. It was an honor." When she turned to leave, Richard's voice stopped her. "Wait, what's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." He handed her a business card. "My office tomorrow, 10 a.m. Every head turned. Everyone in that restaurant knew when a man like Richard Montgomery called, lives changed. But no one, not even Richard himself, knew that the person whose life would change most was his own. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the marble floors of Montgomery Tower, a monument to wealth and power in the heart of Manhattan. In the middle of it all stood Diana Johnson, clutching her worn leather purse, dressed in the best outfit she owned, a navy skirt and a white blouse bought on clearance. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. The receptionist's eyes flicked over her, closed before pressing a button on the phone. "Mr. Montgomery will see you. 18th floor." In the elevator, Diana's reflection looked back at her in the mirrored walls, calm, poised, unshaken. She'd faced worse than rich men with sharp suits and sharper words. When the doors opened, she was met by Miss Winters, Montgomery's assistant, a woman with a perfect bun and a stare that could slice glass. "This way," she said crisply. As they walked down the hallway, Diana could feel the eyes of executives trailing her every step. A black waitress being escorted to the CEO's office wasn't something they saw every day. Winters broke the silence. "Let me guess. He fired you last night?" Diana raised an eyebrow. "Not that I know of." Winters smirked. "Then you will be. Men like Mr. Montgomery doesn't appreciate scenes." Diana smiled faintly. "Maybe he called me to thank me." Winters scoffed. "People like you should know their place." Diana's voice stayed calm. "And where exactly is that?" Before Winters could reply, a deep voice from behind the office door interrupted them. "Send her in." Richard Montgomery's office looked more like an observatory than a workspace, with glass walls overlooking the entire city. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, as if he owned the skyline. "Mr. Montgomery," Diana greeted politely. He turned, his face unreadable. "Miss Johnson, please sit." The silence that followed wasn't accidental, it was a test. Richard Montgomery was a man who measured people by how they reacted to pressure. But Diana didn't flinch. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have a background?" Diana blinked. "Excuse me?" "Education, qualifications." Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU, she said. I was working on a master's in special education before life got in the way. Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly. And now you serve tables? I work 3 jobs, she replied. The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can find students. He nodded slowly and opened a folder on his desk filled with documents and photos. I did some digging, he said. You co-founded something called Freedom Steps? Diana straightened. A dance program for children with physical disabilities. My sister and I started it 6 years ago. Richard turned a page, which is about to close due to lack of funding. Diana smiled faintly. You did your homework? I wanted to understand the woman who danced with my son, he said. You could have ignored him. You didn't. Because he asked, she said simply. Richard hesitated the first crack in his composure. I want to hire you. Diana tilted her head. As a waitress? No, he said firmly. As a therapeutic companion for my son. She studied him. You already have doctors and specialists. I have the best, he admitted. But what you did last night, it wasn't therapy. It was something else. He smiled for the first time in 2 years. Diana looked at him quietly, then stood. I'm sorry, Mr. Montgomery, but no. The billionaire froze. No, I don't work for people who think money fixes everything, she said calmly. And your son doesn't need someone you hired to pretend to care. His jaw tightened. You're turning down a life-changing offer out of pride? Out of dignity, she corrected. And because your son deserves someone who follows him, not someone paid to lead. She placed a small card on his desk. Freedom Steps, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 o'clock. The first class is free. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the richest man in New York staring at a simple business card and wondering for the first time in years. If he'd just been taught a lesson he didn't yet understand. That night, Richard Montgomery sat in his penthouse, the city glittering beneath him like a field of diamonds. But for once, the view didn't matter. His mind kept circling back to that moment in the restaurant. His son's trembling smile, Diana's calm defiance, and the way she had walked out of his office like she wasn't afraid of anything. He had spent his entire life buying control companies, politicians, even people. But Diana Johnson couldn't be bought. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. From the hallway came a soft metallic sound, clink, drag, clink, drag. Lucas was awake. Richard turned to see his son struggling down the corridor with his braces. A toy in his hand. Lucas, he said gently, you should be in bed. Lucas hesitated. Dad, can I go to Freedom Steps? Richard froze. You mean the place that woman runs? She said I could dance there. Lucas said, his eyes wide. Please, Dad, just once. For the first time, Richard didn't know how to respond. Saying no felt cruel. Saying yes meant surrendering control. But then he saw the spark in Lucas's eyes. The same one that had died the night of the accident. All right, he said quietly. Just once. 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up outside an aging community center in Brooklyn. The building looked like it hadn't seen new paint in a decade. Inside, however, the energy was electric. Children of all shapes and abilities laughing, dancing, falling, and getting back up. Diana was at the center of it all, guiding a little girl with one leg through a series of steps. When she looked up and saw Richard and Lucas in the doorway, she didn't look surprised. I was wondering if you'd actually show up, she said. Lucas beamed. Are you ready to dance with me again? Diana smiled. Always. As the music began, Lucas hesitated, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was determination. His steps were shaky, but stronger than before. Every stumble drew applause. Every tiny victory met with cheers. From the sidelines, Richard watched in silence. Around him were children who had luxury. No privilege yet, their joy filled the room more than his billions ever could. He saw parents clapping, holding back tears. He saw a boy in a wheelchair spinning in rhythm, laughing like the world couldn't touch him. And he saw Diana, smiling like she'd found purpose in the simplest act of movement. When the music ended, Lucas turned to his father. Did you see me? Richard's voice caught. I did, son. I really did. Diana walked over. He's a natural, she said. Richard nodded. He gets that from his mother. For a moment, the air softened between them, grief meeting grace. How much do you need? He asked quietly. Diana frowned. For what? To keep this place open. She crossed her arms. It's not for sale, Mr. Montgomery. I'm not buying it, he said. I'm investing in it. Her eyes studied him carefully, searching for the catch. And what do you expect in return? He hesitated. Maybe. To learn how to dance myself. Diana smiled faintly. Careful. Around here, dancing means letting go. Richard exhaled, the weight of years slipping off his shoulders. Maybe that's exactly what I need. As Lucas laughed with the other kids, something shifted inside the billionaire, a quiet realization that power wasn't about control. It was about connection. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel like the richest man in the room. He just felt human. But what Richard didn't know was that this moment, this fragile piece, was about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. Because the world never lets a man like him change without a fight. The following morning, headlines hit every major news outlet. Billionaire Richard Montgomery, spotted at Brooklyn dance program for disabled children. From Wall Street to the dance floor, has Montgomery found a new cause? Richard's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His PR team wanted statements. Investors wanted explanations. And the board of his foundation demanded to know why he was wasting time on a charity with no measurable ROI. He ignored them all. Instead, he sat in silence, scrolling through the pictures taken by bystanders the night before. One of him kneeling beside Lucas, smiling for the first time in years. Another of Diana, helping a child move their arm to the rhythm. The images felt real, not staged, not rehearsed. Just human moments. Then his phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number, you think one donation changes the system? Some cages are built with good intentions, Mr. Montgomery.
He stared at the text, frowning. No name, no follow-up, just that. He slipped the phone into his pocket and tried to ignore the unease growing inside him. That afternoon, Richard showed up at Freedom Steps unannounced. The children were mid-session, laughter and music echoing through the worn-out walls. Diana noticed him immediately. You're early, she said, wiping her hands. We don't usually get billionaires before noon. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. She smirked. Side effects of feeling human again. He watched as Lucas helped a younger child fasten their brace. The boy was talking, laughing alive in ways Richard hadn't seen in years. This place, Richard began slowly. It shouldn't have to struggle for funding. Diana folded her arms. It's not just about money, Richard. It's about trust. We don't need a savior swooping in to fix us. He nodded. Then what do you need? Partnership, she said. Not in control. For the first time, Richard didn't argue. As the weeks passed, Freedom Steps became something more than a side project. It became a movement. Videos of the children dancing went viral. Donors began calling, and media outlets started referring to it as the program that taught a billionaire to care. But with attention came scrutiny. One rainy afternoon, a group of reporters arrived at the center uninvited. Cameras rolled as they surrounded Diana. Miss Johnson, is it true you've been using Montgomery's funding to conduct unapproved research on disabled children? Diana froze. Excuse me? A man stepped forward, slick hair, perfect to suit one of Richard's foundation board members. We've received reports that Freedom Steps is experimenting with neurological rehabilitation without clinical oversight. Is that true? The room fell silent. Before Diana could respond, Richard entered the room. His eyes locked on the man. That's enough, Collins. Sir, Collins stammered. We have a responsibility. Our responsibility, Richard interrupted, is to listen before we accuse. He turned to the reporters. You want a statement? Here it is. Freedom Steps is the most innovative and ethical rehabilitation program I've ever seen, and it will continue with or without my foundation's approval. The reporters erupted in questions, flashes, blinding the room. But Diana wasn't focused on them. She was looking at Richard, at the man who had once dismissed her proposals without reading them, now standing between her and the storm. Later, when the cameras were gone, she found him alone in the hallway, hands shaking slightly. Yes, I did, he replied, because this time, I was the one who needed saving. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the rain outside filled the silence. Then Diana whispered, Careful, Richard. The world doesn't like it when powerful men change. He gave a tired smile. Then let's make them uncomfortable. Outside, lightning flashed across the gray sky, a warning and a promise.
Because what started as a simple dance class was now becoming something much larger. A movement that could change not just bodies, but the entire rhythm of power itself. And the people who built the system Richard once ruled were not going to let it fall quietly. Months passed, and Freedom Steps was no longer just a community project. It was a national story. News outlets called it the dance that healed a billionaire's heart. Social media flooded with clips of Lucas leading routines, his leg braces replaced by lighter supports. Every movement he made inspired thousands. But behind the smiles and applause, pressure was building. Richard's board was furious. Investors were pulling out, claiming he was turning the foundation into a vanity project. And one night, after a long meeting filled with raised voices and thinly veiled threats, Richard returned to his penthouse to find an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a photo of Diana and Lucas taken through the window of the community center. On the back, a message in neat handwriting. Every empire has a price for rebellion. Richard's stomach turned. He picked up the phone, but stopped halfway through dialing security. He realized that whoever sent it wasn't just warning him they were watching him. The next morning, Diana found him sitting alone in his car outside. Freedom Steps. He looked exhausted, haunted. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't," he replied. "I think someone's trying to shut us down." Diana didn't look surprised. "Of course they are. You're threatening an entire system built on control hospitals, pharmaceuticals, investors. You're teaching kids to move without dependency. That's bad for business." He stared at her. "You sound like you expected this." "I did," she said simply. "That's why we keep copies of everything, data, results, footage. If they try to bury us, we'll show the world." Richard exhaled slowly. "You planned for this." "I planned for everything," Diana said. Then she looked at him and added softly, "Except you." 2 weeks later, the threat became real. Freedom Steps' main sponsor abruptly withdrew. The city's health department launched a compliance review. The studio was flooded with inspectors, lawyers, and people pretending to care. Reporters hounded the gates. "Is it true the program causes harm? Are you exploiting disabled children for publicity?" Every headline twisted the story into something dark. But one video changed everything. During an inspection, a journalist secretly filmed Lucas helping a new student take their first unsupported step. The clip went viral overnight with 50 million views in 24 hours. The caption read, "When bureaucracy says no, humanity says yes." Suddenly, the narrative flipped. The same people who had doubted them now rallied behind them. Celebrities, parents, and even medical professionals began to speak out in support of Freedom Steps. Under mounting pressure, the Foundation's board held an emergency press conference. Cameras filled the hall. Richard stood at the podium, calm but resolute. Diana stood behind him. He looked directly into the flashing lights and said, "You can't regulate compassion. You can't quantify human will. And you can't silence a movement that's already taken its first step." Applause erupted. For the first time, the world wasn't seeing Richard Montgomery the billionaire. They were seeing Richard, the father who'd finally learned to follow. Months later, the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center opened bigger, brighter, and fully independent. Its walls were painted with murals of movement and courage. Lucas led the ribbon-cutting ceremony himself. The crowd cheered as he walked unassisted across the stage. Diana stood beside Richard, tears in her eyes. "He doesn't need us anymore," Richard whispered. Diana smiled. "That's the point." Richard looked at her. "And you? What do you need now?" She paused, then said softly, "To keep dancing." As the crowd chanted Lucas's name and cameras flashed, Richard finally understood. The world doesn't change when power decides to give permission. It changes when someone like Diana refuses to ask for it. And somewhere deep down, he knew the real lesson of Freedom Steps wasn't just how to walk again. It was how to follow the rhythm of humanity. Lucas stood in the center of the new Freedom Steps Center, arms outstretched, smiling as other children followed his lead. The boy who once struggled to take a single step without braces was now guiding others, teaching them that movement wasn't just physicality, was freedom. Richard Montgomery watched from the sidelines. The man who once controlled every decision, in his empire now, learning the hardest lesson of all. True power isn't about giving orders. It's about knowing when to step back and let others lead. Diana Johnson, the waitress who had accepted a child's invitation without fear, had changed more than Lucas's life. She had changed a father, a billionaire, and the very system that tried to measure success in money instead of courage. In a world where the powerful rarely change their ways, and those without power often remain in the shadows. This story proves something extraordinary. Transformation happens when dignity meets determination, and when someone has the courage to take a first step, no matter how small. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary thing isn't wealth, influence, or strategy. It's a single, human step in the right direction. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and follow our channel, because the most profound revolutions don't start with grand plans or fortunes. They start with courage, kindness, and the wisdom to let someone else lead the way. And remember, every step matters, especially the ones taken with heart.